The secret was locked away in a distant boarding school in upstate New York, where a girl named Catherine lived under an assumed name and a fabricated history. Her real name was Catherine Ashford, and she was the illegitimate daughter of one of Colorado's most prominent families, a fact that her entire existence had been constructed to conceal. Catherine's mother had been a maid in the Ashford household, young and vulnerable. Her father, Senator Victor Ashford, had taken what he wanted and then discarded her like broken furniture. When the inevitable pregnancy occurred, there had been no marriage, no acknowledgement, no mercy. Instead, there had been money. Enough money to send the girl away, to establish her child in a school far from Colorado, to ensure that the scandal never surfaced. Catherine had grown up believing that her mother had died in childbirth, that she had been orphaned and placed in school out of charity. She had no idea that her mother had actually been paid to disappear, to never attempt contact with her daughter, to pretend the child had never existed. She had no idea that her very existence was considered a family shame, to be hidden rather than a human being to be loved. The boarding school treated her with the distant professionalism reserved for scholarship students, children for whom no family would advocate, who had no connections to protect their standing. Catherine learned quickly that she was different from the other girls, that she belonged to no one, that she could expect neither favoritism nor cruelty, only indifference. By the time she was 16, Catherine had become something of a ghost, a girl so invisible that most people forgot she was in a room once she entered it. She was beautiful in a way that caught the eye briefly before the observer moved on. She was intelligent in a way that was dismissed because she had no family connections to make intelligence valuable. She existed in the margins of everything, never quite belonging to anything. Then, in the spring of 1888, a letter arrived at the school addressed to the headmistress. It was from Senator Victor Ashford himself. The letter explained that he had recently learned of his illegitimate daughter's existence and wished to make amends for his long neglect. He wanted her brought to Colorado, where he would introduce her to proper society and arrange a suitable marriage. He was, in other words, offering to use her to elevate his own reputation, to demonstrate his magnanimity and capacity for forgiveness by acknowledging the child he had previously denied. Catherine was summoned to the headmistress's office and informed of this development, as if she should be grateful. She learned the truth of her parentage in the same moment. She learned she was being reclaimed, not out of love, but out of calculation, not because her father had suddenly discovered a conscience, but because he had political reasons for appearing benevolent. "You should be honored," the headmistress told her, not unkindly. "The senator is offering you a position in one of the finest families in Colorado. Most girls in your situation would be grateful for the opportunity." Catherine felt nothing but dread. The journey to Colorado was long and isolating. Catherine traveled alone, escorted only by a servant hired by the Ashford family to ensure her safe passage. She arrived at the Ashford mansion to find herself thrust into a world of wealth and privilege that she had never experienced, a world that immediately made clear that she did not belong. Senator Ashford's legitimate wife was coldly hostile. His legitimate children were dismissive or openly contemptuous. And the senator himself, a man Catherine had never met, a man who had created her and then erased her, treated her with a kind of benevolent indulgence that was somehow worse than outright rejection. "We'll need to be careful about how we present your background," the senator explained, as if Catherine was a problem to be solved rather than a person. "You'll be introduced as a distant cousin, recently orphaned. We'll arrange appropriate marriages for you. Perhaps a man seeking to gain favor with my political connections. Your value to this family is in your utility, you understand. We can give you a respectable position as long as you don't embarrass us." Catherine was given a room in the servants' wing of the mansion, despite her status as the senator's acknowledged daughter. She was dressed in fine clothing, but not invited to family gatherings. She was introduced to society, but not presented as a legitimate family member. She had been brought to Colorado not to be loved, but to be used, and she was beginning to understand that this might have been crueler than the years of separation. It was during a charity event in Denver that she encountered Thomas Brennan. Thomas was a wealthy rancher in his mid-40s, respected throughout Colorado for his fair dealing and his integrity. He was known to be solitary and unattached, with little interest in the marriage market that dominated Denver's social scene. Yet somehow, at this charity event. He found himself standing near Catherine, observing her from across the room with an expression of peculiar interest. Catherine was standing alone, watching the festivities from a distance, a position that had become habitual for her. Thomas approached and spoke to her directly, something people rarely did. "You don't belong here," he said without preamble. Catherine turned to him, startled. "I beg your pardon?" "I don't mean it as an insult," Thomas continued. "I mean it as an observation. Everyone else in this room is performing. They're playing a role, following a script they've memorized. But you're not performing. You're observing. You're thinking. You're evaluating, which makes you fundamentally different from everyone else here." "Perhaps I'm simply rude," Catherine replied, uncertain whether to be offended or intrigued. "Perhaps," Thomas acknowledged, "or perhaps you've learned that performing is exhausting and ultimately futile, that you're not going to be accepted no matter how well you play the game." Catherine felt something shift in her chest. This man, this stranger, had seen her more clearly in 30 seconds than anyone in Denver society had seen her in months. Over the following weeks, Thomas contrived to encounter Catherine repeatedly. At social gatherings, he would position himself near her. He began conversations that were genuine rather than performative. He asked her questions and listened to her answers as if they actually mattered. And gradually, Catherine found herself sharing things she had never shared with anyone. Her confusion about her sudden emergence in Colorado society, her sense of not belonging anywhere, her deep loneliness. Thomas never asked for explanations or details. He simply listened, and in his listening, Catherine felt something beginning to heal, a wound she hadn't even known was open until someone finally treated it with care. Then, one afternoon, Thomas appeared at the Ashford mansion unannounced and asked to speak with the senator privately. When he emerged from that conversation 2 hours later, his expression was grim. He found Catherine in the library, where she had been hiding from the coldness of her father's family. "Catherine," he said, in the use of her name, her real name, not any diminutive or formal address, made her feel real in a way she hadn't felt before. "I have something to tell you, and I want you to hear it directly from me rather than from rumors that will inevitably begin to circulate." He explained that he had researched her background, had learned about her illegitimacy, and had confronted the senator with what he had discovered. He had made it clear that he knew Catherine was being used and manipulated, and he had made an extraordinary offer on her behalf. "I've asked your father to allow you to come live on my ranch," Thomas said. "Not as a servant, not as a ward, but as my ward in the truest sense. You'll have your own room, your own life, your own future. I'm prepared to provide you with an education, with opportunities, with the freedom to become whoever you wish to be." Catherine stared at him in shock. "Why would you do this? What do you expect in return?" "Nothing," Thomas replied. "I expect nothing in return except that you survive, that you thrive, that you understand that your worth is not determined by your parentage or your legitimacy, but by who you choose to become." "My father will never allow it," Catherine said, but even as she spoke, she knew it was a lie. Her father would allow it, would probably be relieved to allow it, because it removed an awkward complication from his life. "He already has," Thomas said gently. "He understands that his reputation benefits more from appearing magnanimous than from keeping you here where you're obviously miserable." The Brennan Ranch became Catherine's sanctuary. Thomas hired tutors to continue her education. He involved her in the management of the ranch operations, treating her as a partner rather than a charge. He asked her opinions, valued her insights, and created a space where she could simply exist without having to prove her worth. Years passed. Catherine grew into a remarkable young woman, educated, capable, and finally at peace with herself. She worked alongside Thomas managing his extensive holdings, becoming known throughout the territory as one of the smartest people in ranching operations. But something deeper had been growing between them. Catherine had come to love Thomas, not because he had rescued her, though he had, but because he had seen her, really seen her, not as a problem to be solved or a pawn to be used, but as a human being worthy of respect and care. When Catherine turned 23, Thomas finally spoke the words she had been hoping to hear. "Catherine," he said, as they rode together across his ranch land at sunset, I have been waiting for you to become the person you wanted to be before I asked you this question. I didn't want you to feel obligated to me because I had helped you. I wanted you to choose me freely if you chose me at all." He paused, and Catherine saw genuine vulnerability in his weathered face. "I love you," he continued. "Not as my ward, not as my responsibility, but as the woman you've become. And I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you want to, because you see a future together that excites you, because you love me too." Catherine said yes, tears streaming down her face, and they were married 3 months later in a ceremony attended by the entire community, a wedding that sent shockwaves through Denver society when it became clear that the senator's illegitimate daughter had married one of Colorado's most respected ranchers. The senator was furious, seeing it as a betrayal of his political calculations. But he could do nothing. Catherine was now legally an adult, married to a man of greater wealth and standing than himself. Catherine's life transformed from one of hidden shame to one of acknowledged worth. She and Thomas built something remarkable together. Not just a successful ranching operation, but a legacy of helping other people society had deemed worthless or disposable. They took in orphans, hired workers others wouldn't employ, and became known throughout the territory for their belief that every person had inherent value. When Thomas died at 75, Catherine continued his work. She became a figure of legend in Colorado, the illegitimate daughter who had been hidden away and then claimed by a man who saw her true worth. She used her considerable wealth and influence to advocate for women's property rights, for reform of the marriage laws that made women legal property of their husbands, and for protection of children born outside of wedlock. Years later, when people asked Catherine about the turning point in her life, she never spoke of being discovered by the senator or brought to Colorado. She spoke only of Thomas Brennan, the man who had seen a girl standing alone at a charity event and recognized in her a person worth claiming. "He didn't rescue me," Catherine would say. "He didn't save me from a terrible fate. He did something far more valuable. He saw me, really saw me, and in seeing me, he gave me permission to see myself." And that, she understood, was the greatest gift any human being could ever give to another. The gift of being truly seen, truly valued, and truly claimed, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love and belief in their infinite worth.